Welcome to It's Personal, Finance Canada. I'm Christine Conway.
And I'm Cameron Conway.
And this podcast is a very personal look at personal finance in Canada. Welcome to It's Personal Finance Canada. I'm Christine Conway here with Cameron Conway. And if you're in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, or the Yukon, feel free to find us at braunfinancial.com. This week, I picked up Suze Orman's The Ultimate Retirement Guide for 50 Plus. Now, this is a book that was updated in 2024, so very recent, different from a lot of the other content I've been reading lately. And you know what? I'm not usually one for financial gurus, and I will be very honest, I have paid very little attention to Suze Orman's work before this week when I picked up this book. I think I've seen her on TV for 5 minutes years and years ago, but this was a new thing for me.
Yeah, I think most of your exposure to Suze Orman involves Kristen Wiig pretending to be her.
On SNL, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. So not much of a reference point, but let me just say, I've been disappointed with a lot of popular books these days. Just because popular advice is not necessarily always good advice, this was not one of them.
Never confuse popularity with accuracy.
Absolutely. I was impressed, and I was so impressed that it's in the show today. And honestly, if you listen to no other episode that we do about retirement planning, this is the one. Listen to it all the way through. There is so much good stuff here.
Conversely, you can listen to every single one of our other episodes all the way through from beginning to end, liking every single one and subscribing.
That's right. But you know what? This one is really kind of special, and it resonated so deeply with me because these are a lot of things that we do in practice anyway, and I was so impressed to see a popular, incredibly popular public figure say these things, put them in writing. Wonderful. And yes, of course, this is an American book, American content, so I'll Canadianize it where necessary for you guys.
Yeah, so let's just get right into it. And this is kind of like the 10 big things that Christine really liked or didn't like or just thought was interesting about this book that she didn't expect to like.
Yeah, and they're more positive than not. And like I said, a lot of crossover between stuff that we actually do in practice as certified financial planners as well. So that is so cool. So let's jump into number 1, when to retire. So what do you think, Cam? This is someone speaking to the average person in America. When should they retire?
Age 45.
When do they want to retire and when they should retire are very, very different things. And this is why I was surprised, because Suze actually advocates very bluntly retiring at age 70.
Exactly 5 years after you paid off your student loan.
Oh my goodness. Well, and if you've ever given advice, if you've ever, even just talk to your neighbors or friends about retirement age, this can be something deeply personal, right? Like if you've had 60 or 65 or, hey, even Freedom 55 in your mind for years now, this is a hard sell. This is a hard conversation to have for people to basically say, no, wait a second. I want you to work longer.
Yeah, even like the literal Freedom 55 didn't quite pan out. Some people are trying to figure out what they want to do. Do they want to keep up with other people? When do they want to work? When do they want to quit? But yeah, so a lot of people have their own little magic number in mind, even though the government may push that number a little further back when they don't want them to.
It's true. The forces that be, right? There have already been different incentives provided for taking government benefits later that we'll talk about a little bit later on the show today. But yes, that number could mean something to you. And like I said, it's difficult to hear popular advice say, no, work a little bit longer. So let's look at why this is sound advice from a retirement planning perspective. I think there's 3 key reasons. The first is you can save for a longer period of time. And depending on how much you've saved so far, this could be more important to someone that's done less than to someone that's been consistently saving all of the way through, especially if now maybe you're a little bit older. And keep in mind the target for this particular book, she's talking to people ages 50 plus. Second, I think, is you let your money compound longer. The longer you can go without touching your principal, without touching your investments and the growth, letting it ride in the market, that usually translates to a bigger nest egg. Of course, the variability being you can't control the timing of market upturns and downturns, which again, spoiler alert, will show up a little bit later in the show. And thirdly, I think, is funding a shorter time period. If you're not taking income until 70, of course, that's not a fun thing to say, but it is true mathematically. Now, does any of this mean that you're working endlessly at the same job that you've worked today at a high pace, fast environment, if you've got a high-powered career or something really, really stressful? I don't think so. I think a lot of people can still use their number as a transition point to maybe go into something easier or something part-time or something that allows them to see how they will actively spend their cash flow and spend their time when they have time available. It's a lot different when you even a little bit, even temporarily, even part-time, step off the roller coaster ride that we're all in when we do the 9 to 5.
Yeah, and just to back it up, timing the market can be one of the rougher parts of retirement, where it seems like not too long ago, it kind of like, oh, you have like 5 good years, and the 6th year is a little iffy. Then the 7th year, everything falls apart and things get super cheap and people panic and get rich at the same time. But then that doesn't really work anymore now. It's essentially things kind of crash on Friday and it's back together on Tuesday or Wednesday. But this is sort of the ups and downs people play in. Part of this is with the retirement thing, because you can have some options with CPP and OAS. If you defer, you get a bigger payout later on. But then there's also the game of what do I take in versus what I spend out. And it can be a little risky sometimes to be 100% at the mercy of the market to pay your electric bill.
Absolutely. And again, even that, Cam, we'll talk about a little bit further on the show. You've hit so many of our talking points so well right here. So let's talk about this idea. If you are retiring at 70, there's actually a transition here that can make a lot of sense. So she's talking to an American audience about Social Security, but if you're here in Canada, you can translate this to CPP or old age security and other similar government benefits. There are major incentives, and kind of to Cam's earlier wink, wink, nudge, nudge, incentivizing a later retirement. Is CPP, for instance, if you defer, let's say you stop working at 65 and you defer taking it to 70, you can get a monthly increase of up to 42% for your life, indexed. Incredible. And the same thing happens with the old age security. In that program, you can get an increase of up to 36%, again, if you've retired at 65 and you've deferred it now until 70.
Yeah, and this is something we've covered in previous episodes where we kind of break down the math between what happens at 60, 65, 70, and the pros or cons on each side. But with Suze Orman, her big point was she's like one of those few people actually saying that you could have a benefit at 70. And even then, there's some European countries that are forcing people to wait until 70 now. So give or take, and there's all this kind of stuff. But this is just something else to have in your own little conversations of when is the best time to retire.
Well, and 70, whether we like it or not, does seem to be that magical number. Maybe it's statistical, maybe it's based on life expectancy, but on a personal level, it can be such a hard sell for people. And I say that because people will make the argument that, oh, you know, if I wait, maybe I don't live as long and maybe I won't get as much benefit. I should take it now. I should spend it while I'm young and healthy and able. I mean, with the increases like we see that are built into these programs now, that may not necessarily be true for everyone. And of course, yes, there's sensitivity to people that have shortened life expectancy. But for the rest of us, what if you do live a long time? Statistically, that is becoming more and more of a real factor. And the other portion of this as well, people will say to me things like, well, I'm just going to take it and I'm going to invest it in the market, or I'm going to take it while I'm still working. I mean, first of all, if you're still working and you're still at a really high salary, it's taxable. It's added on top. That's a bad idea. And if you say, well, I'll invest it in the market, well, you're giving up this built-in program where they're increasing it for you. Like I said, up to 36% for old age security over that 5-year period and up to 42% for CPP. That is massive. And when people are that close to retirement, they're usually making their portfolios a little bit more conservative, which could potentially make those rates of return hard to beat.
Yeah, and something one of our other podcasts we did, we talked about some people they could be better off using their personal savings between 65 and 70 and then turning CPP on after that. So there is some flexibility and there are some kind of pros and cons where some people will want the higher payout and some people just want to nope out and say, I don't want to work anymore and do it earlier. But this is all different tools and different options that you have to kind of access.
So let's go to our point number 3 and let's talk about longevity of the money. And again, this dovetails perfectly because we just finished talking about something that will last for life. So Suze advocates planning to age 95 or even to age 100 to be conservative. And I kind of smiled to myself really big because I run all of my plans to age 100, even when clients fight me on this and want to see something else. I've got a back-tested file behind the scenes showing the actual calculations that I feel confident in, that I feel comfortable with. Why do I do this? Why should anyone do this? You don't want to be on the wrong side of a statistic at this point in life where you're the most vulnerable. And at this point in life where you can't just go out and make more money at the same way that you can now. We all think we're so invincible, and that's one of the greatest barriers mentally to making the shift and thinking about yourself in your later years where maybe you will be a little bit more vulnerable, and that can be something difficult. But it's part of the natural process of aging and making sure that we have enough, that we're not going to be out of money, that we have assets to kind of back it up if the cash flow is otherwise looking a little bit more rocky than we would like. But understanding this sooner rather than later, doing these tests sooner rather than later, even if they're just projections on what you're saving today, can be so important to give you the data that you need to make the course correction now while you're young enough to have the money compound and have the money work for you for the next however many years.
Yeah, another way you can look at it is, can you sustain your lifestyle on CPP and OAS by itself? And this is the kind of the fallback of you spend too much too early in retirement and you have that longer lifespan. Is CPP and OAS enough to pay the bills and keep you comfortable? And this is part of that balancing act. And this is why we typically kind of go like 95 to 100 for our own internal plans, just in case we still have a handful of clients in their mid-90s. So it does happen and they're still well taken care of.
Oh, absolutely. And we, even at our own little firm, have seen a few people hit 100. So it's not unheard of. It's more and more common. And you usually know someone who knows someone that's lived that long, right? It's getting to that point now where it's part of expectation or it's part of our built-in what we see happening regularly enough in our society. So living off of government benefits alone, oh man, that transitions perfectly to part number 4. And I'm going to read this verbatim from her. It says, pay your fixed living expenses from guaranteed income, end quote. So I've never personally called it this, but I've been matching for years. And what I call matching is you look at your expenses and you look at your core expenses that you will never not have. Because some you have discretion over, some will change as you age, some will go away when you stop working, and some will increase if you need care and help over time. But when you know your core expenses, you know what you need at minimum to live on comfortably during your retirement and actually enjoy it. And there are studies out there that say that when you know that your expenses are taken care of, you worry less, you spend more freely, and you enjoy your retirement more.
Yeah, so this is kind of going back to CPP and OAS can pay the bulk of your fixed bills with something you know that's coming. And then everything from your own like defined contribution pension, your RSPs and your risk, they fund the fun parts of your life. It can be a bit more things like your food and your other odds and ends, but you know that the core things are going to be taken care of month to month.
Well, absolutely. And let's say for a minute you don't have that pension plan. You don't have something waiting for you at your retirement done by your employer. You can still do it for yourself. So Suze advocates using income annuities to fill the gap. And I mean, for me, it depends on where the interest rates are because your payout is so correlated to interest rates and age and timing that you're taking it and life expectancy. And if you have a spouse on the plan as well. But an income annuity or an annuity in general, this is so important. I would say that people will argue with me about this, that the big con of an annuity is there's nothing left for the kids if you live past your guarantee period or if you don't have one that's sufficient. And I would say, oh man, you know what? If you have that certainty, if you can take care of yourself first, if you can protect your assets like your home and you don't have to sell anything, if you can put insurance in place or have other things working for you that you can gift to your kids, this is something that you can do for yourself to make sure that that cash flow is locked in.
Yeah, I guess another con on the annuity side is not all of them have the option to be indexed to inflation. So what could pay the bills today could start to fall short in 8 or 9 years.
I would agree with that. Yes, a lot of annuities that are purchased don't have the indexing feature on them, but you can add it in most cases if it's something that you want. However, you're trading off dollars today, so you'll receive less right now for an income that has an index, promising more in the future. So let's move on to point number 5. So this is where Suze is an advocate of owning your home outright and going into retirement completely debt-free. So no student loans, no mortgage, no debt, credit cards, lines of credit, any of that thing. This is so important as well. Now, of course, there's some sensitivity here because not everybody will own a home. So if that's the case for you, of course, it's just going into retirement otherwise debt-free. And I think either way, this is such a worthy goal. And the reason in my mind that this is such a worthy goal is that anything that we have borrowed, anything that we have to pay back, it costs money. And it's an additional cash flow that we have to plan for and also save for. So I make the argument to clients all the time that basically says if you carry debt into retirement, with, of course, the sensitivity that not everybody has that choice and some people will have to, you do have to save a larger amount now because you're funding a larger cost that's not going to go away until the debt does.
Yeah, every single dollar in debt you have compounds. So you need enough money in your investments to offset that compounding in the other direction. So the less debt, the less of a weight you have in retirement, the more money you have to kind of deal with your day-to-day and actually have good money to spend on things you like.
Well, and depending on the type of debt you have, like if you have credit card debt, it can be very hard to beat that kind of compounding if you're paying 19 or 20%. And of course, if you're on a secured line of credit or something tied to a hard asset, it could be more reasonable. But this is material. And if you are in the position where you can buy a home, right-sizing the home, making sure that this is something that is affordable both now and then is a really good strategy. Although I will say I have talked to people that they do this. They buy the biggest home that they can possibly afford with the intention that this is not a forever home. They know going in that they will need to sell that asset. They're just trying to buy it, have the experience of living in it, pay off as much as possible before they decide they're going to have to pull the trigger and retire. And then they know that that home is just going to be treated like that, like an asset, not necessarily like a home, but as a mechanism of funding later life.
Yeah, and hopefully you don't get caught in the trap where this new downsized home costs more than the other house you bought a few years ago.
It's wild, eh? It's funny what people will pay for and what people will put value on. But the housing market, I mean, you can never time it properly. It's always in flux. It's always changing. So let that be a lesson to you. Don't make your decision based on what you expect things to be in the future. We don't know. I don't know. You don't know. We're all guessing. Only time will tell.
And that's kind of our quick way to kind of mash together like Christine's number 5 and number 6, because housing is such a big part of retirement. If you have one and you're able to kind of keep one through retirement or kind of play the downsizing game, like Christine said, where you kind of strategically know I'm going to go from this place to that place. I'll pocket the difference and I'll use that difference to help fund my retirement in the long run.
Well, and what surprised me here is, again, good advice, but not at all popular. And she devoted a good portion of the book about talking about this, about right-sizing your home, about making sure that you're thinking through mobility and how you would use the home later in life, how you're thinking through how you would do socially in that space or in that location with where you are, how accessible it is, not just for you, but for people that might come to see you. And the point that she made that, again, surprised me was she was advocating advocating selling sooner rather than later and moving sooner rather than later if this is something that you see yourself needing to do down the horizon. And the argument in part was that, yes, it will be easier to do now when you're younger, but also it gets cash flow freed up and you're not putting money into an asset that you're planning on letting go of anyways. So the opportunity cost there was an interesting argument. But like I said, people are so emotionally tied to their homes, especially if they've been there for a while and they've got kids that they've raised there. It is so hard to let go. So this is one that is a tough point to take, I think, but still sound advice.
Yeah, so let's get to number 7. So we kind of allude to this. This is the power of inflation to cripple your dreams, or the loss of purchasing power if you look at it in a different way.
I don't think we have to say anything more than look at the last few years. This is dramatic proof of what inflation can look like. And yes, we've lived in this period of time where it's been absolutely exponentially more than what we have in a normalized cycle. But you can see in short order how things have changed and how those changes can impact quality of life materially when your money needs to stretch further than it ever has before.
Yeah, you can't control the rate of inflation. You can't control sudden tariffs coming and going and just the increased cost of everything, because it just will go up. The line must always go up, but this is part of the planning process. So like we use like FB Canada guidelines that has their own percentage of inflation. Sometimes we like to push it up a little bit just to be a little bit more not optimistic, but just trying to prepare people that things could be more expensive. They will be more expensive, but this is a good buffer of what it could be 10, 15 years down the road.
Well, yeah, we like being conservative because if there's going to be a surprise, I don't want it to be a surprise on the negative. I want to have looked at the factors that could lead to this. And if you think about your retirement, it could be 30 years, it could be 40 years, depending on when you retire, could be less, could be more. But think of how much pricing power. Think of how purchasing power and pricing has changed over the last 30 years, over the last 40 years. That is what you have to be considering when you think about your retirement, and that today's dollar will not be worth what it is today. It'll be different. It'll be something that you now need to have more saved in anticipation of this. And you have to have this as a reality in your life that things will cost more. And if my sources don't index, if they are fixed, I have to have provision through other parts of my portfolio to address this.
And all this kind of gets into our number 8, which is actually having a safe withdrawal rate. Have your safe word for your investment.
Everything should have a safe word, but absolutely your investment should as well.
It's sell.
Safe withdrawal rate. Let's talk about what it is if you're not familiar with the concept. This is based on the very popular Trinity study, and this is incredibly popular in the FIRE community, which is Financial Independence Retire Early. So the research here was, how do we provide a steady stream of income for 30 years without running out of money? So if you're thinking about it in terms of you have a big amount of cash, what percentage can you take out plus inflation and not deplete your asset? And this is a study that looked at probabilities. It looked at asset mixes that were different in terms of the percentage of bonds to stock. And there's some important conclusions that were drawn there as well. So the percentage, 4% plus inflation, is the popular number. But Suze Orman actually recommends 3% plus inflation, which I love. Again, it's more conservative. So what does that mean in practice? It means your nest egg has to be big enough that you could sustain only taking 3% plus inflation. And the other part of that is it has to be flexible enough that in a down market, you have other places to go. You have cash that you could draw on. You have a GIC ladder where you've got maturities coming up regularly enough that you don't have to touch your stocks when they're down. The worst thing you can do in a down market is sell stocks. So you have to make sure that your asset mix has other assets that can be drawn on during that period of time.
Yeah, and this can get a bit more complicated if you're someone that just has, I only have a balanced fund. I have a single balance fund that does all the work for me, where you don't really have that same flexibility. Where if you had like a bit of a balance fund, then you had some fixed income only funds and some equity only funds, because then that way you got a little bit of wiggle room where if the equities are doing bad, I'll just withdraw out of my fixed income. So get a good save like Canadian government bond portfolio that you can pull out because the money will still be there while your equities recover. But if you are just kind of I have one fund and one fund only, there's a lot less kind of flexibility to kind of withdraw out of that.
That's actually a really good point, because a lot of institutions are trying to move to one ticket solutions. And what I mean by that is they're trying to come up with one thing that the advisor can sell that does it all for that risk category.
Well, exactly. You've got like 5 different options of funds of just the different risk categories, and that's it. We've seen with some banks, it is like 7 options with the whole range of like 1 through 5 risk category, and then that's it.
And that thinking actually misses really important planning points, which is the ability, like we have said, to hold on to your stocks during that downturn. The best thing you can do for the long-term value, the long-term growth, is to not sell when the markets are down. So having access or having the ability to split these things up so that your balanced fund, when you sell it, it's selling both. That's not what you want. Like Cam said, you need other assets. You need other things, whether it's cash or bonds or GICs, depending on your tolerance to each and how they move in correlation with the other assets that you have. The next one actually fits into this as well, and this is our number 9. And again, I was surprised that she mentioned this at all. Sequence of return risk. This is something that is so important for new retirees. When you go into retirement, the market performance that year for the stock portion of your portfolio is actually incredibly important. And if you think about it logically, this is when your assets are at their largest, and it's setting the stage or setting the tone for subsequent years of withdrawal. So you need to know that if there's a downturn in that first year or in the first, second, or third years, they're weighted a little bit less as time goes on. It can actually really hurt your long-term projections and the actual amount of money you have available to spend.
Yeah, I know this is something I say in a lot of episodes, but it's something that needs to be hammered home. When you are taking money out of a fund or out of stocks, it is not just I'm taking X amount of dollars. It's instead I am selling X amount of units to get X amount of dollars. So when prices are down, you have to sell more units to get to that same dollar threshold. And this is where the problem happens. So it's not just I'm taking $1,000 out of my bank account. No, you are exchanging so many stocks or units in a fund to reach that $1,000. And when prices are down, you have to sell even more units to get to that threshold. But then later on, when prices are up, you have that many fewer units to sell later on when prices are well.
Well, and that's exactly why your money won't last as long. And that's exactly why having enough money on the sidelines that you can use. I mean, Suze Orman talks about having enough to withstand a market recovery. And that can be a number of years, depending on what period of time you're looking at historically. And so that is a strategy that should be built into your retirement plan, because you can't replace the capital as easily at this stage in life. You're retired now. You're not just going to be like, oh, well, I'll pick up a few extra shifts, make the money back, it'll all be fine. Or, oh, I've got 10, 15 years to go. No, you're living it now. So the strategy has to change to fit the stage of life that you're now in.
Yeah, so now we're kind of at number 10. We've had 9 points that Christine really, really likes. So now let's get to the last one. We're going to end on a whimper here.
The one that I didn't like as much. Absolutely. Well, no, you know what? This is something that anyone who's a popular guru, you're going to hear them say, you hear it all the time. And this is kind of just everybody loves indexes. Everybody loves paying as little as possible. The whole paying for advice thing is a topic that is very, very hotly debated, and no shortage of this here as well.
Yes, a lot of these gurus would tell you not to pay an advisor, would ask you to buy their books.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, not just that. She actually, to her credit, she recommends hiring an advisor, but she recommends hiring a credentialed. So she talks a lot about certified financial planners, which of course I am. And she also recommends making sure that you're paying for the service in terms of fee for service. So money out of your pocket for that, not tied to the sale of an asset, not tied to assets under administration. I would argue with that. Of course, I'm in the industry. Of course, I make a living doing this. It is so hard on our side to set the price right. Maybe it's just me. The price becomes too high, I think, for a lot of people to get access to the advice that they need when they want to pay in this way. I feel that when it's embedded in, and you've got an advisor willing to work with you to help you grow your assets, there's more alignment there. And there's also more ability for the advisor to want to grow with you because it does increase their compensation over time. But regardless of the path that you choose, whether you're looking for someone that you're going to pay a fee to do calculations for you, or whether you're going to work with an advisor long-term and invest assets with them, I think the important takeaway here is understanding what you're paying for either way. What are the hard dollars that are going out of your pocket either for an investment, and is it just the investment that you're getting, or are you getting advice built in? So if a firm has an asset minimum or something like that, there might be certain services that you receive complimentary because yes, you are paying for them, but it is part of their business plan. It is part of how they offer and deliver advice. And I know that personally for me, I feel most comfortable when I'm working with someone that is fully aligned with me so I can be fully aligned with them. And that for me means being able to make real-time conversations and decisions about their assets related to how the markets are going and related to how things are changing as it goes. So, I mean, at our firm, that's how we look at it. We do operate on an AUM basis, assets under administration or under management. And so, again, this is a topic that will never not be debated. But I think if you're receiving fair value, if you're actually receiving the services that you're paying for, understanding the value of the services and how they can materially change your ability to enjoy retirement or your ability to spend during retirement can be the deciding factor. So that's how we saw Suze Orman's book. Like I said, this was new for me. This was a new look into someone that I wasn't familiar with at all before this week. And this again was the ultimate retirement guide for 50 plus. If anything that we said today resonates with you, her philosophy is surprisingly in line with ours, and this is the kind of thing that we like to talk about when we do retirement planning. I am, of course, always a retirement planner at heart, and always will be. So feel free to find us at braunfinancial.com. Until next time, take care.
And all the best.